First of all, welcome to my panelists, and thanks to all of you in the audience for being here. I'm hoping that the next 45 minutes or so is going to be a helpful session. I think one of the things that I'm excited about is that the group that I'm going to introduce to you here are all practitioners. These are all individuals who are at the coalface implementing wearable AR and a combination of these technologies and discovering all of the fun that comes along with being on the edge of new technology, the wins and some of the challenges. So I think this is going to be a very sort of real practical conversation, and we're going to keep it pretty interactive. I'd ask if you have questions, you can ask them during the session. If you just raise your hand, otherwise I intend leaving some time at the end for that. I'd like to, as a next step here, just introduce the panel. So starting next to me here, May Russell, who's the General Manager of Emerging Technologies at the Ford Motor Company. Welcome, May. Next to May, you have Rich Rabbits, a Principal Member of the Engineering Staff at Lockheed Martin. Welcome, Rich. Next to Rich, Paul Zotek, a Director of the Indiana Hernia Center. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
Dressed very nicely for the day.
Position, right?
Yeah, exactly. Next to Paul, you have Jake Steineman, who's the lead project developer at the Digital Marketplace Center for Dow Chemical. And at the end of the group, Mike Fester, who's the director of Wafer Next at Wayfair. As you heard during the intro, my name is John Solomon. I'm a board member of Atheer, and I'm an advisor to the CEO and founder of Atheer Technology. Atheer, for those of you who don't know, is a world leader in enterprise AR solutions with a focus on gesture. So I'm moderating this panel, as you can tell, and I'm going to jump right in here with a few questions. And Mike, I'm going to start with you on the end. If you think about, as you think about developing enterprise wearable applications, what goes into, in your mind, effective enterprise app development, and what considerations are top of mind for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Wayfair, I run a small engineering team called Wafer Next, and we're kind of a subsection of a much larger engineering organization. And so one of the considerations initially was, is this something we should be doing in-house? Should we look for third-party solutions? When we first started the team, it was just me, and then we added a couple people at the beginning to start doing some research, looking at what was out there to see if there were good solutions off the shelf that we could use. Some of it was for 3D scanning, some of it was for augmented reality. And ultimately, we decided that we had the best expertise in-house, given our large engineering organization. We were able to pull in talent. And the custom solution that we were looking to offer for our customers down the line was something that we had a clear vision for, and looking to integrate our data systems with external systems. It's one of these build versus buy situations that Wayfair as a company tends to shift towards the build. We like to consider ourselves a tech company that happens to sell furniture. And so I think when you think of the considerations, you have to think about, what's the capabilities of your team? Is it going to make more sense to, just find a off-the-shelf product? And what are those integration costs to take your existing data set and make it work with that third-party software?
Thanks, Mike. And would you say that that's a long-term strategy, or is more of a how to get going?
Yeah, I think it's a long-term strategy for us. Certainly, if you want to get a quick prototype going, pulling in an off-the-shelf solution and kind of showing a maybe less than perfect example, or getting that implementation going immediately, can be a good way to kind of hit short-term goals. But for us, for long-term value, we're trying to build out our own engineering core systems and functionality. So for us, it was kind of a long-term play.
Okay. Rich, can I ask you, from your perspective, how would you look at it?
Okay, well, with us, everything starts with the product. So we look at the phases of the life cycle product, and we break it down into several parts. The first part is conceptual design. And let me say, before I even go any further detail, it's all about cost savings and efficiency and building a good product. So when we think of conceptual design, we want to get things right when we're dealing with CAD data. We're not in production yet. If we can remove as many problems at that phase, it saves us a lot of money. It helps us build a quality product. The next phase is production, which in Lockheed Martin, some areas when we're building a ship, we're not really doing the production. The shipyard is, but however, when we're building an airplane, we do have the assembly line ourselves. So in that area, we're looking for augmented reality to help with the process, move it along, and there's huge amounts of data. So from an enterprise software point of view, managing all that data is very important. And then the next phase is deployment. So we have people that are operating and maintaining our products, whether it be a naval ship or some ground-based system. And it's very important then to give those operators and maintainers all the information they need to do their job effectively. And lastly, deployment. So you have a product that's built now and you are going to do upgrades to it. So how do you do that? Because it's rarely ever built exactly as you think it was with the CAD system. So you have two choices. You either scan the product itself and bring it back to your office and do your analysis there, or you go out onto the product with, say, augmented glasses, and you look at where you're doing your upgrades and you actually place the new equipment there. So they're kind of our requirements. We're looking in those phases of the life cycle, how we improve them, both cost effectively and quality-wise.
Awesome. Anybody else in the panel want to add and jump in on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think back to your question on what's kind of the right strategy, off the shelf, custom, in-house. And I think it really depends on your organization. So resources, human capital resources, financials are scarce within any organization. You really generally want to look at where do you want to invest your IP. There are areas, if I look at Ford Motor Company, and if I look at some of our corporate systems, HR systems, financial systems, that's not our line of business. That's an area where we can easily outsource, use off-the-shelf software. If we take a look at some of our production systems, our design systems, and especially as we move towards becoming a mobility company that provides digital products and services to consumers, that's where we want to invest our IP. So leading the emerging technologies organization within Ford Motor Company, we've decided to invest our IP, our human capital resources in this specific area. So that's a very strategic decision you make. We had a long history of outsourcing, whether it's to other professional services organization or buying packages, and then we were simply integrators. And we made a conscious decision to insource that and invest in our human capital. My organization, we've got 4 software engineering labs globally in Michigan, India, Shanghai, and London. We've hired in the last 12 months about 500 software engineers, and we've invested in training them in terms of kind of a full stack of technologies, from mobile app development to wearables of all kinds, and really empowering and enabling them to go fast, go quickly. That is a strategic enterprise decision that we've made. In other areas of the organization, we haven't invested, we've outsourced.
Right, yeah, I think that's very well stated. I mean, I think obviously in a large company or a company that has significant resources, sometimes you have the luxury, right, of doing in-house development, whereas a lot of people, and I think particularly what we see is when it's a new area, even if it's core to your company's strategy, you might initially have to go with third-party or outsourced software just because you simply don't have the capabilities in-house to do something like AR or VR development. But I agree with you. It's a great point that if it's strategic, at some point you have to decide, can you get what you need externally, or do you need to do it internally? So switching gears just a little bit, but sort of on the same thread. So I think, just catching also the previous conversation, the previous session, clearly the wearable space in general is, it's having an impact. But I think everyone would agree it could have a much bigger impact. It's still quite nascent, right? And it's an emerging technology. So I'd like to ask, and maybe starting off with Paul,
Sure.
is what do you think is holding it back today from having the full potential? And you could generalize this to wearables. You can talk about AR. Just focus wherever you feel most comfortable and go from there.
Sure. I mean, obviously, being a surgeon from a healthcare perspective, it's the mess that is healthcare to some degree. Healthcare from an IT standpoint is very difficult to deal with. But the biggest sort of thing that I run into is actually aligning, as Paul just talked about, aligning the entire corporation, aligning a healthcare system to accept data into their systems from outside sources to communicate with those companies. I think that's really, from my perspective, what's holding it back. I know it's also the fragmented nature of healthcare in that all the different EMRs don't talk to each other, different systems don't talk to each other. So it's very difficult to integrate that data into one setup that we can use in the office or in the operating room. And that really prevents us from moving forward. And really, like I said, it's really the sort of privacy combined with the data sharing issues that are in medicine.
All right, great. Let's move into maybe more of a sales and marketing discussion. Jake, I know that's an area of your focus. And do you know, A, how much are you using these technologies, and B, what's holding it back from, software and just implementation?
Sure, yeah. So from an AR, VR perspective, so I work in the Digital Marketplace Center with Dow, which is based in Chicago. So that's a new innovation center we opened last year to focus on building digital applications, innovative applications for our marketing and sales team. And over the last year, we've had a lot of focus with AR and VR, trying to build things for HoloLens and for other wearable applications. And what we found is for wearables specifically, there wasn't really a use case right now for sales and marketing. And what we transitioned to is actually AR, VR on mobile devices. And we're starting to see a lot more uptake and interest in AR, VR on iPhones and Android devices, just because that's a device that everyone already has in their pocket. It's much easier to distribute those applications and build for those applications. Bring them to trade shows, have customers or potential customers download and use those applications wherever they may be. So an easier pipeline to our customers, mostly from a hardware perspective, is what we found to be most effective. So steering away from some of those wearables and using the devices that we already have today.
Yeah, great. It's interesting. It makes you think about, we sort of have a somewhat of an arbitrary line, I think, in technology on what we call a wearable, right? I think you could say that a mobile device is kind of a wearable. It's just that we've moved the border a little bit. Mike, maybe you could also, as an area of interest of yours, talk a bit about that.
Jump on that, because I feel like right now the biggest thing that's holding us back is the consumer adoption and awareness. Pokemon Go, for the pros and cons, brought the terminology to the public last year, and people started thinking, oh, it's augmented reality, and even though that game really wasn't it was getting people to think about it and to talk about it. And I think it wasn't really until Apple's, AR Kit just came out, that we had an opportunity to reach millions of devices. We've been doing a lot of work with Google and Tango, and the device works really well, but the consumer adoption is really low. And so working with that device early on gave us the opportunity to build up a content library and to think about the user interface. But while we were doing it, luckily I have the flexibility of my team to not be looking for immediate ROI, and we're thinking long term. I think with iOS 11 being out there, people being able to use ARKit and see these AR experiences, it's the early stages and the early days, but people are going to be aware of what the technology can and cannot do. And I think over time they're going to request and want to purchase devices that are more and more capable. And I think we'll eventually get to the point where we have wearables, like true wearables, glasses, etc. But right now the cost is too high, the hardware is too bulky, there's limitations around field of view and the additional additive light in bright environments. There's still technical challenges, I think, that need to be worked out, but I think we'll get there.
Yeah. Maybe just to continue with you, Mike, and then we'll switch to other panelists, but seeing we got you on a roll there. Mm-hmm. So if you think from a developer perspective, software development, What do you see, though, as some of the choice points and also challenges of developing for wearables versus developing for, say, an iPhone or for a smartphone or tablet?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it is a different environment, and so what are some of the considerations?
Yeah, so again, there's like right now, when we think about developing a software package, we're trying to be device agnostic as possible, and we're trying to focus on an experience that would make sense with a headset on. So with Wayfair, for example, our AR app lets you view furniture in your home. It's kind of an obvious use case, like, wow, I can actually see the digital thing. I don't have to measure anything. I know if it's going to fit. That, we think, is just the table stakes for AR. We're excited about the possibility to kind of do a lot more, understanding the environment, for example, pulling out products that the customer already has and suggesting replacements for that product, or things that go with the style if you want to complement what you have. So understanding the environment, I think, is a core capability that AR devices are really in the early stages of being able to do. But I'm excited to see the shift, I think, in mindset. Right now, it's all about placing digital content in your space. And, oh, I can have a cube, I can walk around it, that's cool. But I think that is going to wear off quickly, the same way VR was kind of cool for a little while. It's like you do all these 5-10 minute demos and think, wow, this is amazing. But then you don't really continue to use it unless there's a valid use case. You're doing something novel that you can't do on another device. So I think that's where AR is really going to accelerate and take off. But we're in the early enough stages that those applications haven't been built yet. And so our team likes to think about what are the opportunities in that area for software development.
Excellent. Rich, how would you see that from a Lockheed Martin perspective? When you think about development, development for which form factors, what's pulling you towards the wearable specific technologies versus smartphones and tablets that you can run AR, VR, applications on?
Right. Well, usually what drives that is situations where we want hands-free.
Right.
So if we're standing in front of a cabinet and we're doing maintenance on it, it's important that the design is done well. And I'm an advocate of voice commands, so I like a lot of voice commands.
Yep.
Maybe the hand gestures, maybe to set up your initial layout of your information. But I feel once you have your layout, and you should be able to save that configuration so that you can bring it back, that once you have that set up, I like to go with a lot of voice commands at that point.
Yeah. I would think, Paul, that you may have some similar thoughts from a medical perspective.
Yeah, I was gonna second that. I mean, clearly, when you're in a sterile field, you can't be touching things. That's really the hardware issue is definitely a big issue in healthcare. One of the things that people have to deal with is the angle of these cameras and stuff. We had to figure out how to order, basically a welding helmet on mask on Amazon to fix that problem for the Google Glass. We had to do a bunch of different things to get that angle, because I'm always changing my angles. When you're working on somebody's belly, it's deep and the lighting's different. The lighting is a big issue. But that's really the hardware issue is a key thing in healthcare also.
May, how about you? Can you jump in on that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a wearables perspective, we really view it as another channel. So if we look at kind of the spectrum of where we're going to use wearables within the organization, there's certainly kind of the internal-facing, enterprise-facing use cases with our product designers, our engineers to collaborate. There's certainly use cases within the plant in terms of ergonomics, in terms of training. My specific area is consumer-facing. And so it's really critical from a wearables perspective as an additional channel for it to be consistent with all our communication channels with the customers, whether it's the website, mobile app, the head unit in the vehicle is a channel in which we communicate with the customer, and then wearables is an extension of that. And consumer expectations are really heightened in terms of what they expect out of an enterprise and the experiences. One of the areas where we really have to focus in terms of VR and AR and can add value to us and is not in that cool but not useful category is really how customers experience our vehicles. We have a tremendous increase in urbanization globally. The way we sell to customers is via dealerships. Dealerships require real estate and space. that's scarce in urban areas. Dealerships tend to have a presence in more suburban and rural areas, but yet we've got an urban market that we have to sell to. So from a marketing and sales perspective, we have to think of how do we give customers in urban areas the experience of riding our car on a road in different conditions and with different configurations. Our F-150 truck, for example, has over 1 million configurations, options, combinations of options. And as a consumer, if I'm in an urban area, I want to be able to, quote unquote, test drive the car without having to perhaps drive over to a suburban area. So we're investing in a concept of Ford hubs in urban areas where there isn't a physical car, but you can go in, you can leverage AR especially, configure your vehicle, get the feel of test driving it to decide what you want. And it's a consistent experience with what you would do on the web. It's the same configurator.
Yeah, that's awesome. What I like what May was saying is that, on the one hand, it sounds maybe a little bit far-fetched, but on the other hand, it's not, because I think the way you guys are thinking about it is very much around transformation. The comment in the previous session, stuck with me around, if you're just going to make an incremental improvement, there's no way you can justify investing in new wearable technology, whether it's AR, VR, if it's just incremental. You've got to think about transformational changes. And I think that's one of the biggest kind of potential opportunities for wearables is it's not just a 10 or 20%. It's really an ability to completely rethink how something's done. And if you think about our lives today, right? So much of what we do today is mobile-centric, and it's allowed so many processes to be completely redesigned because it's a mobile-first way of doing things. And I think we're just at the beginning, which is really cool about how wearables are really just they're the next transition in allowing us to reimagine how commercial and consumer activities are achieved. And I'm wondering if I can just ask some of my panel members here, perhaps I'll pick on you again, Jake. Do you have some projects you're thinking about using wearables that you see as really transformational and that can make not just an incremental improvement to how things are done, but like it's just a radically different way of doing work?
Yeah, I can think of two. One actually that I'm working on now at Dow, and one that I had done previously with wearables. So one that we're working on now is with our flexible packaging and our specialty plastics business. So today we build 3D CAD models for different flexible packaging that we design and build and ship samples to customers. And we do predictive modeling for drop tests on those flexible packaging. And that's all up until today has been done on 2D screens and 2D monitors. So what we're doing with AR is actually solving two different problems, kind of killing two birds with one stone. So from one perspective, our engineers that are building these 3D models can now, with mixed reality, actually visualize and put these 3D CAD models in a real room, in a real space, and see how they react when they're dropped from, say, 5 feet, 10 feet, et cetera. And then from a marketing and sales perspective, we can put these different packaging prototypes on a real supermarket shelf, in a real kitchen. So our customers can see what they look like in realistic lighting. We can do rapid prototyping. We can swap out labels, things like that. So it's allowing us, what previously took us, say, 6 months to do prototyping on some of these models, both from a manufacturing perspective and from a marketing perspective, we can now do in days or weeks. So it's definitely speeding up that process significantly because we can do it digitally on your phone or with a wearable device. The other example that I mentioned was actually a startup I had a couple years ago as a glass explorer on my own, kind of outside of some of the stuff I was doing at Dow. We used Google Glass as a drowsiness detector. So kind of thinking beyond the screen and beyond the camera on Google Glass, we used the sensors on glass to detect if you were getting tired while you were driving using the accelerometer, gyroscope, and there was the IR sensor on there as well. So kind of thinking beyond some of the, what glass I think became known for in a lot of cases, thinking it's unique to have sensors that you wear in your face, and I think Google and a lot of companies are looking for the best way to do that. So trying to take advantage of some of those scenarios, and that really opened up an opportunity that wasn't there before because of wearable devices.
Awesome, those are great examples. One of the things that I've come across working at Apple and previously as well is you can make a big impact with a product and with a particular point product around how you get work done. But if in enterprise, if you want to really sustain as a technology, you have to be connected into systems of record. Whether it's ERP, whether it's just broader systems. Otherwise, you're sort of hanging off on the end here. You're a data island. You really kind of don't get the full efficiency. So I'd love to hear from a number of you on the panel on the experience you've got, the importance of integrating into systems of record from a software perspective for that wearable to not only do something really innovative, but actually be part of the IT infrastructure within the company. Maybe May, just start with you, and we'll grab a few others as we go.
Yeah, sure. I think you hit the nail on the head. If you implement any software product, whether it's wearables or not, and it's not connected to your back-end systems and the systems of records, it's kind of cool, it's a prototype, but it's not scalable. From our perspective, if we kind of go with the example of a consumer using VR and AR to configure their vehicles, all that information is available in a system of record. It's used in our marketing material, it's used in our website. So as we're developing the VR, AR technology, it has to have the appropriate connectors, and I think in order for AR and VR to really become kind of the standard in the market, these middleware connectors really have to be established, and we have to have really flexible products that enable us to do it. But it has to connect to our back-end assets, our digital assets, our pricing assets, our product configurators. I need to be able to provide a consistent experience, consistent data across all channels. This is just an additional channel. Just from a consistency, but also from total cost of ownership. We don't want to have duplication and redundancy within the enterprise and organization.
Yeah, thanks. Paul, maybe just skip over to you. Obviously you live in the world of Epic and
Sure.
so on. So are the systems mature enough to be connected to those systems of record or not yet?
No, that's really, especially in healthcare, and I kind of mentioned it as the major roadblock is the integration of the EMR. Some are willing to go around it, but in the U.S. There's a law actually that's going to come into effect that the Trump administration is pushing through to open up the EMR's data to smaller startups and different things. That's coming in 2018. It was part of the Affordable Care Act. That's something that will change that because it's going to allow for integration from smaller companies and things. But right now, Epics and the Cerners, hopefully nobody's here to be offended, but they're protecting the data because data is money and data is power, and so they don't let people integrate. And so most hospital systems will resist using anything. Like I'm using a mobile messaging app that's HIPAA compliant with all my patients. They can text me directly. But my hospital system is resisting because it doesn't integrate with Allscripts, and they want it in their medical record. And so I think that is definitely a major issue. And I can see where it's coming from. We recently did about a year ago. It's probably the first case using kind of streaming technology, wearables, face-worn wearables in the OR that I can honestly say changed the patient's care. We were using the AMA technology, the Expert Eye with ODG. And I had a surgeon on in Cancun who was actually telestrating binocular through the ODG, augmented reality, into the field. Really cool, but the hardware was on my face. You had to get used to it. I'm an early adopter, but it was one of the first times that I had another surgeon given a second opinion, and she was literally telestrating into the field. We had some issues with lighting. It's always an issue. It's not perfect, which comes to that hardware. But the point is, is that a doctor-patient relationship from Cancun? And I think that's a big issue in medicine that we have to be, what constitutes that? And you can't practice telemedicine across state lines and stuff. So I really needed a record of that because she was showing me maybe you should go here, and we were making decisions on that patient. So I get it where that should be in the record, and I think that's some of the gray zones or black and white, depending on what you look at it in medicine that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. And obviously the highest bar in medicine in terms of integrating systems of record, because it's not just for efficiency, it's actually for legal and it's for health as well. Mike, how about you?
I'd love to talk about 3D content because I feel like that's one of these underserved problems of AR and VR and 3D content in general. We need to think about getting the content to the customer for the experience. So in Wayfair's case, we've got about 8 million things that we sell. We're adding probably 30,000 new SKUs per week. And we're trying to keep up as much as we can with 3D content. We're somewhere at like 50,000 models, which when you talk to smaller companies, like, wow, 50,000 models, that's a lot. And we think of our entire scope of product, we're like, no, we want to get a lot more. We want to scale this up a lot. But one of the things that I think we've done that's a bit unique is open up those 3D models and the data associated with them. I shouldn't say to the public, but we do have a model API that people can sign up for. We have probably over 100 or so different companies that have approached us to work with us and to use our data in various applications. Initially, it was one of those internal debates around, should we be opening up this data? It's valuable, should we protect it? Ultimately, we decided that the marketing and the exposure of our content was a greater asset, essentially thinking about the next hyperlink, or how do you do like in-place advertisement, essentially, with our content. So for example, someone who's staging or trying to sell some new construction, and it's an empty building that they just pulled out of CAD. They want to populate that and make it feel like it's a real living, breathing place. And so to do that, they can pull in our content and show that to their potential customers. And over time, I think we'll be able to individually target the customer as well to say, what's your style? Here's what it would look like in a modern aesthetic or classical look. And so I think over time we can use this content to engage in additional ways of driving, marketing and pushing your content out to other devices and applications that maybe are not your core business, but thinking about how you can share that data and using it with other applications, I think, is an interesting consideration.
So just to recap, so then you've basically decided that from content management, that needs to be something that's totally accessible to the wearable, to the wearable technology.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's some area that clearly backend integration, as May started off in this conversation. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything.
I'd like to jump in.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So we're approaching that problem in a few different ways. The first way is we're using GPU technology to stream across our intranet pretty much anywhere in the world, detailed models, millions of triangles, both collaboratively, so one person's controlling the view and everyone else is able to see the model, and we have some really high detailed models that we could do that with. The second thing we're doing is when we do our VR experiences, we can create 360 panoramas that can go on company phones, and you're able to view either in 2D, where you just kind of spin around in the environment, or if you have a device that you can put on your phone, you'll get the virtual reality experience. And lastly, as I said, laser scanning is very big in going out and scanning, say, an entire naval ship. First of all, you have huge amounts of data to store, so that's one problem. But then you can bring that data, which is pretty much the ship, to either your AR device or your VR device. Now, that last part, we're still working on that part. That's still a work in progress.
Awesome. I have two more areas I want to get into, and then we're going to jump into questions, so just a couple more minutes. The first one is a little around hardware limitations, things like battery life, memory, GPU, things like that. And we've talked a little bit about, so is software kind of holding us back? And I'm going to switch a little bit to do we think it's hardware limitations, performance in the hardware that's holding back wearable, really sort of practical wearable applications in the enterprise? And maybe anybody want to jump in on that topic, that see that as a...
I think it might be a little bit of both. It really depends on the use case. Again, I think that's been brought up too. But from a mobile device perspective, we've seen great advancements in some of the mobile AR technology from Apple, iOS 11 AR Kit, even Google and AR Core. But what we're also seeing is significant decreases in battery life. So it's really taxing mobile device systems.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a holdback. We don't want you to have to hook up to a battery pack like we had to do with Google Glass. People were had a huge battery pack in their pocket just to walk around, which really limits you in a lot of different ways. But so first, from my perspective, from marketing and sales, limiting some of those AR experiences to shorter bursts, right, is going to be key too. Because also from a ergonomics perspective, in AR now, you're holding up your phone, walking around, so that gets uncomfortable. So it would help from both perspectives.
Yeah. How about you, Paul?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, from a healthcare perspective, both. But I know that healthcare is daunting, but I challenge you all to continue it because, this story I just told you about bringing a surgeon in from Cancun, we've done it to Australia, we've done it to India. Imagine yourself in a rural community and you don't have access to care, and now all of a sudden you can bring an expert in to kind of help the guy who's working with you. It really does have value, so I challenge everybody to keep working in that space.
I mean, in a way, right, you can think about wearables as a logical extension of telemedicine, right? And it's a way to bring it, very
right. And that's what we're building. The virtual hernia center is what I call it, is because we're integrating Fitbit, iHealth glucometers, using a software platform for telehealth, so that it used to be you go and get your blood pressure and everything taken. Now you walk in, we're trying to make it so you walk in with that data. It's really a vertical integration of the entire patient experience. From the day you come on my website, you can sign up for a text messaging app. You can do all your paperwork online. You come in, you see me, we give you a full visit, without having to do a lot of paperwork and everything. You get a summary of that. We do the surgery the next day. We're connecting to you on apps to check on you and using wearables to kind of follow you post-operatively. You can use the accelerometers in some of the different devices to follow people's activity post-op to make sure they're getting up and moving around. So I think you're going to see a vertical integration of all of this stuff across the spectrum of patient care, and I think that's the exciting thing. But don't get too scared about the HIPAA stuff. I think it'll go away. It's kind of like every day we all break HIPAA. I mean, believe it or not, every time you pick up the phone and call your doctor's office and give them all your information, I mean, you're using the most unsecure, phone line on the planet. They've been tapping it since they built it, right? And everybody's worried about us using 256 encrypted, all this other stuff, but the reality of it is you talk to somebody on the other line that's not identified, you assume they're with healthcare, you assume nobody's tapped that. We break it every day. It's going to change. If Bill had invented the phone yesterday, we'd be arguing about the phone line. So that's just kind of my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's awesome. Actually, that's a great lead into my last set of questions, which is around security. May I'll start with you. How do you think about security considerations, concerns for the whole field, and obviously one that's front and center from I would say security, privacy put in one category.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is a critical consideration, especially as you start to scale up, right? When you're doing smaller prototypes, you tend not to consider those factors, but certainly scaling up for consumer usage or enterprise usage, it becomes a significant problem and opportunity. Kind of tying as well to the earlier questions, in addition to hardware considerations from a software perspective, and if you look at the inhale-exhale of information with VR, AR, and wearables, we tend to really focus on the exhale. What consumer experience are we rendering? What's really critical and important is what are we inhaling? What information are we getting back out? What are we doing with it from an analytics perspective? What can we do with the information we get out? And big data is obviously a really big part of the industry, where we store the images, where we store the information, and what problems can it solve for us in the future that we haven't envisioned yet. Now, with that comes the security and privacy considerations. We've gotten really good at parsing text, protecting text, authorizing, authenticating, tagging, being able to scrub, anonymize text and numbers. Images are extremely difficult and a challenge, and I do think that's the next frontier from just securing, whether it's cryptography, whether it's anonymizing, and even in non-healthcare industries, we have high degrees of sensitivity around PII data, SPII data, personally identifiable information. We also have union considerations with our workforce.
Right.
So all of that, I think, has to be carefully thought through, and there has to really be technology that helps us establish kind of metadata on top of images so that we can secure it appropriately with the appropriate logic and roles.
Absolutely. Rich, I can't imagine that you pay any attention to security and privacy at Lockheed Martin. Tell us about from a wearable perspective. Yeah.
As working in the Department of Defense industry, our lab, the Surface Navy Innovation Center, we used to be all Wi-Fi and wireless. And there came a new mandate now that's gone in any type of secure facility. So we have to, at least for now, get by with how do we get around no Wi-Fi? So, for example, if we're using wearables on, say, a Navy ship, instead of just going to the piece of equipment that maybe you have to maintain, you first have to go to some host computer, hardwire, download all your content, and then go to the piece of equipment.
Yep.
So cybersecurity is a big issue, and we're hoping someone comes up with a good solution.
Yeah, it's a good startup for someone out there to figure out how to really encrypt that. All right, we could keep going for quite a while. I think I'm going to just pause here and turn it over to the audience and see if you have any questions for this panel of really varied experience in implementing Wearable in commercial applications. Any questions out there?
Yep. I'll shout it. It's going to take a while to get here. So, man, you talked about the integration and connection between systems. Do they exist? The big ERPs of that stuff exist. If they don't, who should be building them? And do you see that happening quickly?
I do see it happening. I think we're on a really rapid change curve upwards. Being part of a large enterprise like Ford, we've invested a lot in connectivity between purchase packages that, let's say, do product configurations. As I mentioned, we've got millions of product configurations, and there are packages that do that. There are connectors and various microservices that help pull the data out and push the data in. We also need to connect up to cloud providers. They're not all internally hosted applications, and there have been tremendous advancements, I think, just in the last couple of years in terms of being able to access that and secure it with, let's say, OAuth 2, et cetera. So it exists. It exists for certainly from a technology perspective, from Java microservices. It exists in terms of APIs that are provided. I'd like to see the wearables industry start to integrate into those with kind of open platforms and open APIs. So it is possible without a lot of proprietary information. I think it's just a matter of scale and getting enough demand that becomes accessible on the market.
Thank you. Any other questions for the group? Yep. Go ahead. Got a mic up there. Okay.
My name's Chris. I'm with the U.S. Navy. So we're a repair and maintenance facility, and we have security and software considerations. But there's some angles here which are very appealing. And this is like a software or marketing and sales type of applications. We're not in that space. So you're looking to present like the perfect solution of refined models. But what about that 80% solution and getting that velocity of creating your content? And I think Mike had talked about that. We want to create these environments, but we need to make them very fast. And because we're starting with zero, no models.
Yep.
How do we create those?
Yeah,
Mike,
I can address that quickly because that's like a big consideration for us. Most of the furniture products that we sell don't go through a CAD design process. So we're thinking, how can we recreate these? The majority of our products today are actually drawn by artists. So we have like an army of offshore artists that are doing the work. We've been investigating like photogrammetry, which is a 3D scanning technique. And we can get, I think, pretty good results. And especially when you're looking at that like 80% is good enough. You can automate a lot of stuff through this reconstruction. It's essentially taking a lot of photos of an area or a product, and the computer can, in the course of maybe an hour or two, reconstruct the 3D model that in most cases is good enough for that kind of initial, especially prototyping work or just getting content out there. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space.
Jake, do you want to just add something about doing things fast, and do you have a thing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a lot of what we're trying to do in our new innovation center in Chicago. So that's going to be one of our roadblocks I can see going forward. It's with the project I mentioned before with flexible packaging. We had the benefit of having a team that already had some of these 3D models, but I know going forward over the next year we have a number of other AR projects that we're going to be doing, and the issue I see is not having the 3D content. I mean, a lot of what we're doing is digitizing a lot of our data in the first place so we can connect to some of these systems, but we just don't have the digital content. So digitizing it and creating 3D models are something I know we're going to need to do, and that'll be the first step in really building out a lot more AR applications. Because of these first ones that we've had that have already had the content, now we're seeing a lot more interest. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot more investment in 3D content, especially as we move into the future, where a lot of applications are going to be expected to be three-dimensional, VR, AR. I think everyone will have to do a lot more investment in creating 3D content.
May, something you want to add to that?
Yeah, just real quick, because I think there's another question in the back. I think fast is definitely the new big. From an industrial perspective, we always focused on scale, and that's how we were going to make revenue. But in this digital economy, whether you are facing to a consumer or internally, speed to market is essential. And even when facing to consumers, we really focus on the MVP. What's the minimal viable product to get it out there quick? It can be rough. We'd rather focus on fewer features that are done well rather than a lot of features that are done poorly or take a really long time. We have applications, let's say, internally facing to train our plant workers on painting. And what's important isn't the color, it's not what you're painting, it's just the viscosity of the paint and are you applying it evenly. So the software that we would develop doesn't even really require a lot of sophisticated image rendering. It just simply requires some simple calculations in terms of how they're applying, and the paint color doesn't matter, none of that matters. So I would just encourage you to think about fast, what's the minimal viable product that gets you where you want to go so you can learn quickly and move ahead.
All right, a question there. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Andrea Brown from Volvo. Group trucks, not cars. So what I can say is that I think this is also going to drive a change in the industry, the supplier industry, particularly maybe Lockheed and Ford. You probably have some component suppliers that need their CAD in order to build your assemblies, et cetera, we have the same issue. But the CAD today that we get is not built for this vertical assembly, reassembly, manufacturing. So we're going to need to push a change in the supplier agreements, perhaps, to improve how we can use that CAD. Are you dealing with the same issues, or?
Yes, we definitely are. And we have kind of, over the years, established the workflow that we're still following, where we have a system set up where we can do bidirectional translation directly with our CAD systems, which makes things a lot easier, but you still do have huge amounts of data to deal with, and the way we do that is we're relying a lot on GPU technology to handle that. But where we're getting even more massive data is now, as I mentioned earlier, laser scanning. We just did one of our ground facilities, and it's a billion points, the point cloud. So once again, we plan on bringing that type of data both into virtual reality and augmented reality. But that's a work in progress.
All right. Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap up. Please join me in thanking the panel for their time.